Hey, Dwell, if you are watching this on Sunday, it's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all of you out there. So appreciate everything that you do. I had asked Kyle to speak this week, and he's like, I'm not preaching on Mother's Day. You got to preach on Mother's Day, which I think is kind of weird. I think it maybe should be the other way around, but he'll preach to us next week either way. So happy Mother's Day to all of you. We also want to make sure you know that this coming Wednesday is Dwell Kids. You still have a couple days to register. Make sure you do that. We're so grateful for everything that you do, Dwell, all the ways that you give above and beyond. I mean, right now we have, I think it's 4 different meal trains going for people. We've got 3 within our church, 1 that's connected through work, and I'm just amazed to see the generosity. I mean, we know what groceries cost right now, so making those meals for all those families, I just continue to say thanks for your giving. If this is your first time in one of our home church locations, there is a box for you to give in with an envelope. Feel free to do that before or after the service. We're so grateful for everything that's given. So with that, we're going to go into the book of Joshua. We finished up Acts last week. There are 28 chapters. We were in there for about 7 months. And now we're going to go all the way back to the Old Testament and spend some time studying the book of Joshua. And I've mentioned before that one of our practices at Dwell is this intentional preaching through the books of the Bible. And it's really to keep ourselves honest. We're trying to do that in a rhythm of 1 New Testament book, 1 Old Testament book, because we don't want you to be scared of the Old Testament. We want you to love it. There are 993 roughly pages in the Old Testament, depending on your font size and the thickness of your pages, but there's only 288 pages in the New Testament. So 993 versus 288 in the New. So if we avoided the Old Testament, we would be ignoring more than 2/3 of our entire Bible. So we don't want to do that. We want to be students of all of the Bible as God intended, not just the parts that we like or can understand easily. So that is why we are starting off in the book of Joshua, or as I will sometimes lovingly refer to him as Josh, just because I feel like I'm more connected to him that way. So this book was written in 1406 BC, right, before Christ, and it's 24 chapters, and the whole story spans 25 years. And before we dive into reading the first chapter today, I want you to know a couple of things. There's some really important things to know. The first is that this book begins on the heels of a man named Moses dying. And Moses, if you don't know much about him, was an incredible leader. I mean, think about, maybe you know the stories about the 10 Commandments or the parting of the Red Sea. That was him. So Moses has just passed away, and he actually mentored Joshua to become his successor. You don't have Joshua without Moses. You can actually read about their mentoring relationship more if you want to in the book of Numbers and Exodus and Deuteronomy. There's some really great leadership examples for us in there as you watch their relationship unfold as Joshua begins to take the reins and gain Moses' trust to really lead well. So where we pick up today, you will see that Joshua is officially being installed by God as the leader of this people group, the Israelites. And in case you're wondering, Joshua isn't surprised by this assignment. He knew Moses was going to pass away and that he was going to take his place. Back in the book of Deuteronomy, which is literally the book right before Joshua, you can see the very last verses. God told them both the plan. And where we pick up today is just going to be the fulfillment of that plan of Joshua becoming the leader. Wouldn't it be nice if we all had things so clearly laid out for us like that? I think that was really kind of God to have everyone just kind of be on the same page, no surprises, this is the plan. A little bit envious. I know that doesn't always happen in the Bible or in real life, but that is what Joshua gets to walk in on, is being set up by God with a great successor before him, Moses. So let's pick up Joshua chapter 1. I'm going to read from the NIV. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. That's a pretty incredible promise. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. We're going to pause there. We are going to go through the whole book, or the whole chapter of Joshua today, but we're going to pause there because there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of history that needs to happen and take place. So if you're not interested in history, then you might want to just like do some doodling right now, but I think it's really helpful. Did you notice there's this place, this large territory that God is spelling out to Joshua that he gets to take? Well, that territory really has one name, and it's called Canaan. And Canaan was a large and successful country located in what is now, we have a modern map, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. And Canaan, the name came from another man, Noah, his grandson. And this is what is often referred to as the Promised Land. So this land, Canaan, the Promised Land, was promised by God to this group of people, to the Israelites, back in the very first book of the Bible. And it's honestly really confusing, so I don't want you to feel bad because no one wants to keep the same name, apparently. So like Canaan is the Promised Land. It's also called the land of the Hebrews, the Holy Land, the land of Israel. I mean, I could go on, but what you need to know is it's all the same. And I just think of it like laugh how many names there are for the U.S., right? Like America, USA, United States of America, Blake Shelton's God's Country, red, white, and blue. Like you get the picture, right? Okay, so don't be scared when you hear all these other names. It's talking about the same place. So the Canaanites, Canaanites are the people within Canaan, like we call people that go to dwell. Canaanites were a variety of ethnicities, so there was a blend happening there. They prospered in trade. Why? Because they were along the Mediterranean Sea. And they worshiped a variety of different gods. And they are actually, this is interesting, attributed to inventing the world's first alphabet. So that's Canaan. That's the Canaanites. That's the area that Joshua is being prompted to go in and take over. Now, there's another group of people you may notice. You can go back and look. Verse 4 talks about the Hittite country. Okay, so it might be helpful for us to know who are the Hittites. Well, the Hittites generally have a reputation to have been the most like hardy and warlike of all the different groups within Canaan. And they occupied the mountainous countries on the south side. So it's really natural to suppose that this group of people would be the most difficult to conquer. And God is encouraging Joshua, you'll even have the territory of the Hittites. You don't even have to worry about them. So God has some outrageous promises and these incredible commands that he continues on. We're going to pick up in verse 7. It says to Joshua, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Verse 8, keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So in those verses, there's these promises, right, to Joshua. I'm just going to list out a couple of them right now. He says to Josh, I will give you every place you set your feet. No one will be able to stand against you. I will never leave you or forsake you. You will lead these people to inherit this land. Like those are incredible promises that the God, the creator of the universe, just gave to Joshua. So why does he need to be told to be strong and courageous? Why does he need this reminder? Like the most powerful thing in the whole universe has just told him he's going to be successful. He's not going to be able to be taken down. Well, I have to laugh a little bit because I think we can maybe relate to this. I mean, probably not as extreme as like God like audibly spoke to me and told me that I didn't have to worry necessarily. I mean, sometimes you might have those awesome experiences, but knowing might make things easier, right? But it doesn't make them easy. I don't think anyways, in my personal experience. I don't know if you figured this out yet, but fear isn't always logical. It just kind of takes ground wherever it wants. So yeah, like Joshua has been told he's going to have these things, but he's also been told, and you're going to have to go into the Hittite country and dominate all these people. You're going to have to go in and have war. even though the Lord tells him he's going to be successful, that's still really scary. So I think about like planting Dwell. A year ago, I left our previous church to plant Dwell. And I remember the conversations that Kyle, my husband, and I would have. And we had so many times where the Lord had told us, like, you're going to be okay. I'm going to take care of you. You're not going to fail. And guess what? Still terrified. Still like wondering, still unsure, still hesitant. I mean, Kyle gave me permission. He's like, you can tell everybody. Like I was totally unsure and yet sure at the same time. Like I knew that God was calling us to do that. I knew that he said to, but it still didn't make me not lay awake at night and wonder, like, how is God going to pull this off? How are we going to be able to financially afford this? I mean, you can probably think of many examples in your own life like that. So yes, God told you, you're going to have all this stuff, but he's also telling you, but you're going to need to be strong and you're going to need to be courageous. So Joshua was in need of strength and courage. And the narrator of our passage, which, I mean, we assume it might be Joshua, but we don't know that 100%. He doesn't reveal Joshua's feelings here. But we do hear the Lord tell him 3 different times, just in the little bit that we've read, be strong and courageous, and then increasing intensity, be strong and very courageous, and then be strong and courageous. He continues on, do not be terrified, do not be discouraged. And then at the end of the chapter, you'll see the people tell Joshua as well, only be strong and courageous. So maybe Joshua was overwhelmed with fear at the time of his commissioning. Maybe he needed to hear these words up front in order for him to draw on them for strength and courage in the future. But either way, God knew that he needed this message. Now think about it. I just said he had some really big shoes to fill. He was going after Moses. Even though he'd been apprenticed by him, mentored by him prior to his death, Joshua was following in the footsteps of literally the greatest leader his people had ever known. I mean, the closing words of Deuteronomy, if you go back, paint an incredible picture of Moses' exceptional relationship with the Lord. And I mean, we know no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. Even ever since then, Moses was just like the one. He was the one whom the Lord knew face to face. He did all these miraculous signs and wonders when the Lord sent him to Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to the whole land. For no one had ever shown the incredible amount of God's power and strength the way Moses had done. So Joshua needed strength and courage to follow in his footsteps. And maybe you felt that way. Have you ever followed behind someone that was just incredible, that was so amazing? Kids, maybe it's your older sister or brother. You're just like, they're so awesome. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever going to live up to them. Athletes, maybe it's the old captain of the team before you. Managers, maybe it was the person leading the company before you. I mean, that can be a very intimidating experience, and we need to be strong and we need to be courageous. Another thing that probably contributed to Joshua's fear was he's now been told, you're going to become the leader of an entire nation. A nation, by the way, whose name means, the Israelites, means wrestling or fighting with God. That sounds pretty horrible. Like, I don't want to lead a group of people that's their reputation, grumbling, stubbornness, rebellion. But the Lord had called Joshua, and it said, the Lord had caused the worst generation, so these people's parents, to die in the desert rather than enter the promised land. The people that Joshua's going to be going into the promised land with are the offspring of the originals that God had called. Why? Because those people were wrestling with God, and they were disobedient, so they weren't able to make it to the promised land. And now he's got to lead their kids. Like, that sounds, horrible. So Joshua's task to lead Israel into the promised land is momentous for his people. And Israel has been wandering in the wilderness, waiting for this moment for 40 years. But from a broader kind of theological perspective, I mean, you go back to these earlier books, it's been more than 40 years. They've been waiting for generations. Way back in the time of Abraham, who's an earlier character in the Bible, before Israel was even a nation, before Abraham had any children at all, the Lord promised Abraham's children that they would become a great nation, and they would inherit the land of Canaan. And so for well over 400 years, God's people have been waiting for this moment. Can you imagine now being that leader who gets to take them into this moment? Like that, the amount of anxiety, I can't even fathom. He needs strength and he needs courage right now. And as we look back on just these few verses we've read so far, friends, if you're taking notes, there are really two big commands. Yes, it's the be strong and courageous. So God gives like 4 different promises, but then he says, but I'm going to ask you 2 things. I'm going to tell you 2 things you need to do for me. You need to be strong and courageous. And the second thing, I don't know if you caught it, was keep my law. And he says all of it. Obey the law, know it, meditate on it, do it. Basically, you're going to have guaranteed success with these conditions. You need to be strong and courageous, and you need to be careful to obey the law. I had mentioned a couple weeks ago that I went to Kentucky with my family, and I learned a lot about horse racing while I was there, which, by the way, this weekend is the Kentucky Derby. Yes, I will be watching it now. And while we were there, we got to learn a lot about jockeys, which are the little men and women, when I say little, I mean little, that ride these horses in these competitions. And they don't just ride them, they direct them, right? They are the leader of that incredibly powerful animal. And you may or may not know this if you've been around horses, but horses they have a metal piece that goes in their mouth, right? It's called a bit. And this piece of metal that fits in the horse's mouth, it helps with clear communication between the rider, or if you're racing, the jockey, and the horse. And you use the reins to control the bit in their mouth. And these reins, right, help them to understand their boundaries and their destination. Where is this horse going? Where are they not allowed to be? I think of the law that God is talking about, the part of the Bible that this group of people had so far, in a similar way as the bit. Like, Joshua is being asked to filter every decision through the law, just as the horse filters every decision through the rider. The horse is not its own in the race, right? Joshua certainly was not his own in this race, right? And neither are we. We have a jockey, so to speak. We have someone that's telling us where we need to go, what our boundaries are, what's okay, what's not okay. And I actually have a fun little picture for you that's going to come up of my mom and I dressed up as jockeys riding a fake horse. So you're welcome for that gift today. So that's what I think about when I think about what does it look like for Joshua to succeed. It says be strong and courageous and keep my law, all of it. So now I want you all in your home churches to go ahead and have a few people read verses 10 through 18 out loud right now, chapter 1, verses 10 through 18. So Joshua, if you noticed in that passage, didn't relay what God told him to the officers and the 3 tribes. He gave them the bottom line, but not all the rest, right? So he goes and he tells them like, hey, here's what we're supposed to do. But he hasn't told them about all the promises that God gave him. He hasn't given them all the context. And I find that really interesting because my tendency is to like tell everybody like all that I know. Like I don't want to withhold, especially good news like that. Like, hey, this is what God told me. But what I think, or what stood out to me as I read this, was this: mature leaders filter out what is for them and what is for the followers. They have discernment, right? Like, so what is for me, God, and what is for everyone else? What is for the few versus what is for the whole? And I think that's what Joshua's doing here. He realized like the promises that God gave him were for him. They weren't for the entire nation, but the task at hand was for the entire nation. Does that make sense? Like, it's so important for us to be able to know, if we want to be good leaders, if we want to be mature followers of Jesus, that not everything that we hear or we learn or we know is for everyone. We have to have a filter. I think of little kids, right? And how they just spout off everything. They have no filter. Like, we'll go to the grocery store and Everett will often, that's our son if you don't know him, he's 3 years old. He loves to say hi to everyone, which is fine. No, it's great actually. And then he'll say, my name's Everett and this is Mom, to like someone who's not even making eye contact, right? Like looking at the wheat thins. And I'm like, hi, yeah, this is my son. And it makes me laugh, right? Because he has no filter. He hasn't matured yet. He doesn't realize that not everyone needs to know his name and that I'm his mom. That's not like for anybody anywhere to just randomly start a conversation. And I think that's a sign of maturity, right? As we get older, learning like what do we need to share with other people and what do we not. And so I take that as a note for myself as I'm reading through the book of Joshua with you. So Okay, so what did we learn now? We're in these other verses, some other things. We've learned it's go time. Like, it is time for them to take the land. And there's some other really interesting things here that I want to make sure to point out to you. It's really easy to read through this and want to ignore all these different tribes and different names and just kind of say like, whatever. If we want to really understand this passage, you're going to appreciate it more if you know what we're talking about. So there's 3 tribes that Joshua talks about, or that God wants Joshua to address: the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh. So if you go back to verse 12, and notice that Joshua has an order for the officers of the people, that's in verse 10, and then he has a separate address to these 3 tribes in verse 12. So again, wisdom and maturity here. I'm going to share this information with this group. I'm going to share this information with that group. So really quick, these 3 tribes that are mentioned, if you want to research them more, you can go back to Numbers chapter 32, and there's the story of Moses and these 2.5 tribes, technically, because you saw it's a half tribe of Manasseh. And the reason why these particular tribes desired an inheritance on the other side of the Jordan, which is what you read about, was because these tribes were particularly rich in cattle. And this land that they wanted to inherit had this wonderful pasture. And so obviously, like, you have cows, you want to have good land for them. And Moses made them a deal back in Numbers 32 and said that they could do that, but that they would have to be ready to still fight with the rest of the Israelites when their time came. So they didn't just get to go after their little pasture land and enjoy it and then get off scot-free. So Joshua's like, hey, remember what Moses said to you? Like, we're back for you to fulfill that promise now. So that's what's happening there, in case you wanted to know, because otherwise it could feel really confusing and out of context. So even the Israelites told Joshua to be strong and courageous. Did you catch that? I didn't catch it the first couple times I read chapter 1. I was like, oh, that's nice. They're telling him to be strong and courageous. What's weird about that, friends? What's weird about that is Joshua never said to them, God told me be strong and courageous. So where did they get that? How did they know to say to Joshua, be strong and courageous? Maybe you've had an experience like that. Someone's like knows something without knowing it. You're like, do you realize like what you just said to me? Like, I've been, thinking about that or been meditating on that for a while. Like that can't be an accident, right? That's what I think happened here. I think God has charged these people all with this similar thing to encourage their leader, be strong and courageous. I mean, I know I've had so many times where I'm walking through life in a season of fear or a season of doubt, and all of a sudden God just keeps lining people up and they're saying the same thing to me. And it's such a beautiful experience. And so I think that's so cool that the chapter ends with this group of people saying back to Joshua, be strong and courageous. And they had no idea the depths of what they were really saying. So, where do you need, strength and courage in your life right now? I mean, who do you need to come alongside and say to you, Deb, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. To hear that from someone else, right? Not just in your prayer time, but to really have people that can speak that over you and into you. I think about, there's a movie called Hoosiers. It came out in like 1986, so I wasn't born yet, but I've seen the movie. It's a great movie. It's a classic. And in the movie, which, by the way, is based on a true story, you have this backwoods kind of high school team in Indiana, and they overcome these incredible odds to come to the Indiana State Championship. They're a basketball team, and they face this school in the state championship that's like literally 10 times bigger than they are. And before this humongous crowd in Indiana University's like massive arena, by the way, this arena is like 100 times bigger than anything they've ever played at before. We have the coach, who's played by Gene Hackman, and he walks the team into the arena the day before the game, and he can just sense how overwhelmed and afraid these guys are because it's just so big and intimidating. And so what does he do? He gets out a tape measurer, and he has one of the players measure how tall the rim is, 10 feet. And then he has them measure the distance from the free throw line to the rim, 15 feet. Very standard. And his point, he goes on to say, is the arena is much bigger, but none of the basics have changed. The key to winning is to keep doing the basics well. That's the point of the opening scenes of the book of Joshua, friends. God's people are about to go into a whole new arena. But the basics of what it means to walk with God never change. Not in that day and not in ours either. So in your life, you're going to go through multiple seasons. You're going to be in different size arenas. Maybe you're in a new one now. Maybe you've become a student for the first time, or some of you are getting married or having kids. For others of you, it's building a career. Maybe you're single again. Maybe you're retiring. Maybe you're going into ministry. The arenas will change, but the basics stay the same in our relationship with the Lord. And sometimes you feel like the fear and the pressure is just going to swallow you up, like these guys in Hoosiers or Joshua. And you're asking yourselves the questions like, do I have what it takes? Am I going to make it in this season? And God just takes out the tape measure and he says, standard. The basics are the same. Be strong and courageous and keep my laws. Those are the basics. Those are the standards, Joshua. Those are the standards, friends. So dwell, this is our timeless truth for this week. The road before us, the task at hand may seem daunting, but if we keep God's laws, if we meditate on them, if we know them, if we do them, and if we are strong and courageous, we're going to come out on the other side victorious. So we have 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and it's brought Israel to stand up on a mountaintop and overlook the wilderness, the land of promise. And every Israelite over 20 years of age, when they left Egypt under Moses' leadership, has died. Except for 3 people. 3 people are Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. All the others had died without realizing their cherished blessing due to their disobedience. And so Moses passes away, and then we have Joshua at the top of the mountain with the children of the previous generation. And as the children and Joshua stand on the mountain and they see in the distance the promised land, the realization of their expectations, were they ready? Did they appreciate the great blessing of finally about to receive the blessing that was promised their fathers? Are they going to be able to move into this land under the leadership of a living prophet and possess the country, not on their terms, but on the Lord's terms? Or will they pollute their inheritance as the fathers had done before them? Well, we're going to find out. We're going to check back next week, and we have a very special guest that's going to take us into Joshua chapter 2 to find out what is going to happen. Are they going to be able to take the promised land? Who's going to survive? Are they going to be strong and courageous? Will they obey the law? So have a great week, Joelle, and we'll see you back here for Joshua chapter 2.